Welcome to the Recovery Church. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and I am life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Because I live, you shall live also." Friends, we have gathered here today to praise God and to witness to our faith as we celebrate the life of John Paul Koonce. We come to share stories, sing songs, read scripture, and offer prayers and love as we celebrate the life of this extraordinary man.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in celebrating the life of John Koonce today. My name is Michelle, Shelley, to those of you who have known me since my childhood. John is my uncle. And when he and Nancy, as I was growing up, they've been very near and dear to me for my whole entire life. When Nancy asked me to help today, I said, sure, I'll do anything, whatever you need, not realizing that that meant that I'd be standing up here in front of all of you today. So I am sort of accustomed to speaking to a captive audience, but most of my people are 5 and 6 years old, and they look at me adoringly, and they hang on my every word, so I'm kind of counting on you guys to step up for that today. So I'd like to share a few special moments and memories of my Uncle John that were written by my Aunt Nancy and Chantel. So he was the youngest in his family. Johnny was blessed with an infectious spirit. He had a spark that everyone loved. John formed countless friendships that have lasted a lifetime. John always liked getting involved and trying to make things better. Of course, his children, Craig and Leah, think that perhaps that he had been a much better grandparent than a parent. So as a teen, John helped to start a teen club where everyone could hang out and dance. John graduated at 17 and he joined the Navy. He served on the USS Independence during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He served on the flight deck, launching planes and unhooking bridles, and when the planes landed. It was a very dangerous job, but John loved it. In later years, John and Nancy enjoyed many Navy reunions. On John's 21st birthday, 3 significant things happened. President Kennedy was shot, John bought his first car, and then John was arrested for armed robbery. John and his friends were stopped by the police. They were put in the back of a police car and identified by the bar owner as the robbers. Later on, they were finally released as the real robbers had been found. On New Year's Eve of 1963, John and Nancy met on Hennepin Avenue. John's and Nancy's private joke was letting everyone fill in the blanks on how they really met. Hennepin Avenue, New Year's Eve, not really giving a lot of details of how that meeting went. In reality, that meeting led to Nancy inviting John over for coffee. He accepted, and not just because he found her interesting and attractive. On their next date, a blizzard trapped them both at Nancy's apartment, which turned out to be not so bad of a gig for the two of them. John and Nancy were in a new apartment with new TV, new furniture, no distraction. Just a warm and comfy environment to kickstart a relationship. Everyone said that it wouldn't last, but God had other plans. John and Nancy played house together just like that for 59 years. Yeah. Right? John and Nancy were blessed with 2 children, Craig and Leah. They lived in southeast Minneapolis. They loved Como Park in the early mornings. They had family vacations, where John wasn't sure if the car would make it, but they had money for bus tickets if not. Lots of car rides with Johnny Cash and my favorite one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. A Burlington Northern caboose was their summer cabin. It came with a 2-hole outhouse. One summer, John needed to make repairs to the roof of the outhouse, so he tipped the outhouse, but the board that was meant to support the outhouse slipped, and the outhouse landed on Nancy. John lifted the outhouse all by himself to save his Nancy, and he pushed it so hard that it flipped over 4 times. Nancy spent that night in the hospital with John by her side. John worked a 6-year apprenticeship to become a journeyman printer. At the time, Nancy's grandma tried to warn her that printers were known drinkers. John was involved with the typographical union. He served from the local president to an organizer for the future. John and Nancy moved to Somerset, Wisconsin. It was an exciting and new adventure, and the farm became sacred ground to them both. Living in the country and being in nature in the St. Croix River Valley felt like a daily vacation. John and Nancy met an older couple who lived down the road, Victor and Edith. John looked up to Victor like a father figure, and they spent time together daily. Eventually, John and Nancy became the older couple on 37th Street. On John and Nancy's 25th wedding anniversary, John went to help a neighbor with sheep shearing. He ended up getting knocked out by a sheep, which also left him with a black eye. Naturally, that was the beginning of a lot of jokes about John and the sheep, or it could have been Nancy's frying pan. John had a surprise party for his 40th birthday, and he was excited to have friends who gathered to celebrate with him. John drank till he blacked out that night. This event ended up being the catalyst for him to seek treatment. Looking back, it turned out to be just the birthday he needed. John left treatment on New Year's Eve, and he and Nancy went to their first sober dance. John celebrated 40 years of sobriety on his 80th birthday, just this past fall. John was truly a miracle of the program. He found his recipe for life. John took many of his gifts full circle, enriching his life and the lives of countless others in so many ways, doing genealogy research, making crosses, volunteering, meeting friends for lunch at the Legion, connecting with many great and supportive neighbors, showing up for family events, showing others that he cared with his jokes and his songs. When John and Nancy got married, they created a bond that stayed strong for the next 59 years. They always knew love for each other and that they could count on one another no matter what. Over the years, John and Nancy sang a lot of songs. Their favorite song they sung together was Side by Side by Diane Reeves. I'm not going to sing it to you, but I will read the lyrics. We don't have a barrel of money, maybe we're rugged and funny, but we travel along singing a song side by side. John never passed up an opportunity to create a memory. He opened the door wide each and every time. Thanks be to God for the life of John Koonce.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Miller, and like so many of you, John to me was a steward of the program of AA and helped me to get on my feet in my recovery path in the early days and beyond. Thank you, Nancy, for this tremendous privilege to speak on behalf of my great friend, John Koonce. I met John and Nancy at the Christ Recovery Center 15 years ago when I was at my absolute rock bottom. And John loved the Wednesday night sing-along. He was there every week with Nancy, and I always remembered that he was never afraid to raise his hands in praise, and that made me really uncomfortable when I was early on. I never was comfortable with that, but John had him high in the air, and I liked that. And I was curious about John. He loved the sing-along, and he loved This Little Light of Mine. Every week he would come up during the final song of the sing-along, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And he would sing the closing verse, This Little Light of Mine, and with his little handmade crosses, he would target new faces of people and throw them at them to enrich their experience and make them feel welcome and want to come back. John loved the sing-along. I got to know John, and he helped me to kind of get a grip on my recovery. And one day, John asked me, after I'd been there for about a year, he asked me if I would like to participate in a pen pal program that he had established with Ernie Larson, where they were writing letters to the inmates at Riverbend Prison in Nashville, Tennessee, who were in the AA program. And I submitted my name, and shortly after, I started to receive letters from a man who was an inmate at Riverbend. And that went on for some time, maybe 9 months, and I remember being really excited about it, that John had brought me to this. And one day he said, "We got to go to Nashville and meet your guy." And I knew that John was in touch with Morris, and I was really excited. So about 5 of us flew down to Nashville, and the first thing that John wanted to do when we got there was go to the mission. He wanted to see, how Nashville treated their underprivileged and poor and homeless. And so we went down there, and in short order, we were serving food, and I was playing music while they dined. And that was really special. John was always looking for ways to lift people up, find broken people, and lift them up and give them hope. And I was one of those fortunate people. From that point on, we made another trip with a large group and went down there. And I remember walking down Broadway at the Honky Tonks with John and Nancy, and we walked into this boutique guitar shop. And John really wanted me to play this $25,000 Gibson Les Paul. And I was so nervous. I didn't want to play it. I thought maybe I would drop it or the guys would look at me funny. But I didn't do it. But then he persisted. We went out to eat after, and he kept saying, "Let's go back there. You need to play that guitar." And I did never do that. I kind of regret not doing that now. So when we went into to Riverbend Prison, I met my pen pal for the first time, Chuck. And the other men that were in there, they had a flourishing AA program within the prison. And I met so many guys and shared stories. And John thought it was really important that I would bring my guitar in there and sing them a song when the meeting was over. And I was terrified because I didn't know what these guys were like. They were probably rough criminal types. Not at all. I started to play. He wanted me to play "Like a Rolling Stone" by Bob Dylan. And so I played it, and by the time we got to the chorus, all the men in there were pounding on the table and screaming, "How does it feel?" And it was a magic moment. And from then on, I had relationships with multiple guys in the prison, and John taught me that, that experience really, I think, helped galvanize my grip on recovery and my path. And John, I give credit to my good friend John for that. And I want to mention, too, that some of you have looked at the cross up here with the shattered glass, and I just think it's so deeply symbolic of reconciliation and redemption with the booze bottles and the cross. So beautiful. And John had that kind of insight, and I really picked up on that, and that's helped me to walk in recovery and have this 15 years of sobriety since I met John. I'm so grateful for his friendship. And I know he's touched many of you in similar ways. So thank you for this honor.
Good morning, everybody. I wish I could be with you today, but it didn't work out. I'm glad that I can share a couple of comments and words with you and a couple of songs for John and for Nancy. I've known them both for many years, and it's been a great blessing in my life, like it has for many of you. And I remember almost every time John Koonce would walk up to me, he'd have that funny look in his eye, and I knew a joke was coming. And sometimes it was clean, sometimes it wasn't. But he always made me laugh and smile. He brought a lot of joy to my life. He and Nancy also, their demonstration of love and service was really something for me to watch, and it helped me, and it still helps me today in my own life and in my own recovery. I'll always appreciate the time they spent with my little brother Paul. One time, Paul and I did a concert in Michigan. We drove up from Nashville, and I knew John and Nancy were coming, but when we pulled into the church where the concert was to unload the equipment, there they were, John and Nancy, sitting on a bench with big smiles on their face. And it put the biggest smile on Paul's face. Unbelievable. And that's what John did. It's what you both do. There's a thread that runs through all of us today named John Koonce. And that's what's brought us all together. I've lived in Nashville for many years now, and I remember after I moved down here, I got a job at the Riverbend Prison doing a pre-release program. And then I asked Ernie Larson to come down, and we shot some videos here for the prison system. Now, I had met Morris, the infamous Morris, already, but when he met Ernie, things really took off. Ernie brought Morris's spirit to St. Paul, and John Koonce got involved, and Morris can share the story of the crosses, which is really a beautiful, beautiful story, better than I ever could. But that thread is still with us. I see Morris all the time in Nashville. Charlie B. is from Minnesota, is also in Nashville, and I see Charlie all the time. So John, you will live in our lives forever, and you too, Nancy. And I want to play this song called The Thread, which is about this thread that runs through all of us. There is a thread running through, connecting you to me, me to you. I'm gonna hang on, I hope you do too. Don't know where it's going, but I'm going there with you. Today I smile with a twinkle in my eye. I see clearly, not a cloud in my sky. I've learned to love for reasons that are right. I know it's happening, cannot tell you why. Blind faith is something so new. I'ma close my eyes and hang on to. Don't know where it's going, no. Don't know where it's going, no. But I'm going there with you. Yes, I am. I'm so much stronger, I know it's true. Not when I'm alone, but when I am with you. There is a thread and it's running through. I'm gonna hang on, I hope you do too. Blind faith is something so new. I'ma close my eyes and hang on to. Don't know where it's going, no. Don't know where it's going, no. But I'm going there with you. Yes, I am. There is a thread, and it's running through. And I hope you hang on to. Good morning, everybody. I wish I
Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies.
You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just a short word about John Koonce, Uncle John to me. From the time I can remember, John has been a part of my family's life. Every major family event, he and Nancy were there. Even in the not so big events, they have been there for me and my family countless times. When we were kids, John and Nancy bought a caboose and put it on their land in Bemidji. Those were great times, playing with our cousins, Craig and Leah. I love you guys. Craig and Leah, we'd go, and my brothers and sisters, we'd go trekking through the woods from our house to the caboose, and we'd be out playing for hours, barefoot, wild and free. One visit, they were working at the caboose, putting up the outhouse, and it was called Nancy's John. That still cracks me up today. So John always had a great sense of humor. And one of my favorite grown-up memories was going to the mission in St. Paul to the sing-along with my Uncle John, my Aunt Nancy, and my Grandma Schroeder. When the song I'll Fly Away was playing, John said, "Come on, let's dance." So, let's see. So we put our arms up and pretended as if we were flying, and we ran around the room singing, "I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away." Some of you may know that one. So it was a great memory. It was a great time with him doing that. And so John was blessed to fly away while in the arms of his Nancy. I love you, John. You will be greatly missed. Your life lives on this side of glory, with the many friends and family that you have blessed with your time and love these many years. I am grateful for my Uncle John and the gift that he was to me.
I have only known John for the 9 years that I have been pastor here, but he came onto my radar right away. I heard the story about the cross, the one fashioned out of booze bottles to remind us that new life, resurrection, can come out of the death of alcohol. Early on, he brought Morris here to speak, and we heard about the thousands of cross necklaces that had gone all around the world. Many of you have known him much longer, so let me just say a few words about John's deep faith and integrity. They say that when you become a teacher or a pastor, by your pupils you'll be taught. I learned much about faith from John Koonce. John had principles and wasn't afraid to voice them. For one thing, he did not approve of foul language. When one of our interns preached and used profanity, he got an email from John. John said, "That's how I talked when I was drinking, and I've tried to change that behavior. I need to see a better example from the pulpit." And we all went, "Yep, he was right." But later he wrote the same intern complimenting him on something, and he said, "I just didn't want you to think I only wrote criticism." John and Nancy never lost their deep trust in God. In these past years, the health challenges were extreme, but they continued to surrender it all to God. Every morning they read from Jesus' Calling. When I'd ask if we could pray for them in church, He would remind me not to tell God what to do, like so many people do in prayer, but just to have God keep holding them. As his health worsened, his spirit seemed to glow brighter. And there is no John without John and Nancy. Yesterday, one of their close friends sent me a text. She said, "It has been such an honor and gift to be in Nancy and John's circle. Talk about a love story. They have both shown such faith and grace the past couple of years with quiet dignity and respect for each other. I have learned a thing or two by observing these two. Haven't we all? I know John is in a beautiful place. My favorite memories of him will be the times he drove me around on his golf cart in the little Eden he and Nancy had cultivated in Somerset. What started out as a cornfield was transformed into trails through native plants and trees. Once again, he had worked with God to turn something that no longer gave life back into the paradise God had created it to be. Long ago, Jesus prepared a place for John. John knew what it was to experience resurrection in this lifetime, and he knew exactly where he was going in the next. Chances are there was a golf cart waiting for him when he arrived. Thanks be to God for the life of John Koonce.
Hi, my name's Dan Koonce, John's nephew. John was the youngest of 8, and I spent a lot of time with John the last 20 years going through genealogy and family trees. John had a lot of hobbies. You heard about his farm. He spent a lot of time turning that hobby farm into something else. Remember when he had peacocks? Pretty cool place. And all the crosses and it took up all of his time, you'd think, with picking up sticks and branches, and it seemed like every storm that came through hit your guy's place, and he just working, and that's all there was. But with his hobbies, I know Koonces have a hard time showing their love, but he was proud of his children, Craig and Leah. He really was, and he talked about them, little John, all the time, really proud of what he did. Though he or we don't know how to show it well, it was obviously there. Just a side note that Carol shared with me about John's humor and how he's kind of always been funny that way is when his mom passed away in 1949, so John would have been about 7. And when they were loading her in the hearse, they had black hearse back then, he asked his father, Robert Adrian, Grandpa, "So girls go in hearse, do guys go in his? What is the guys called?" And Carol just shared that with me and never forgot it. But one of the other hobbies he had was he was really into his history in the past. I mean, really into it. He was one of the original guys. He got it from Alice Koonce in Texas, but he was the main authority. If you go on Ancestry, it's almost all John's stuff. Dennis Jones is the big one down in South Carolina, or North Carolina. He got almost all of his stuff, a lot of local research, but John. And John did it the old way. He went to the libraries, the courthouses, and with Nancy, and they went everywhere, physically, phone calls, met people personally, and met some pretty amazing people along the way. So when you hear of him from Nashville, the Koonces started out in 1709 in North Carolina, and then moved up and over the mountains, and had actually fought 3 generations, lived 3 generations paying tithe to the Queen, to England, until the Revolutionary War came. But they moved to Nashville, and from Nashville they set their roots, and from there they moved to Mulberry Grove, Illinois, and then to St. Paul later. And I had some fun times hanging out with John and trying to find graves, and one of the first times we stopped up at John and Nancy's, and we were going to do our little walkabout for a week, and GPS graves, because I didn't know where, my grandma's grave was and where Leonard's grave was, and we did those things, and When we went from Somerset to head to Uncle Jim's, you're going to stay overnight at his brother Jim's, he wanted to pull into Cambridge and get the best fish sandwich you could ever get. I'll buy. So he got in there, he went to the bathroom, and he forgot his wallet on a 1-week trip. And so when he went to the bathroom, I talked to the waitress, and I go, can you help me with this? Can you call him Uncle Mooch? Because he's going to drive him nuts. He wanted to drive all the way back to Somerset to get it. I said, no, I got you covered. No. So they called him Uncle Mooch, and he tried to hold it back. After we left, asking Uncle Jim a bunch of questions, stuff left the next morning, we went down Highway 8 to a little restaurant for breakfast. And when he went to the bathroom, there was a couple that was there, and I said, can you guys help me with this? Can you call him Uncle Mooch? And he came out, and he goes, that's not bad. My husband's the same way. This little old lady, she goes, we call him Eye Pockets because he can never reach the pockets. And they got to be, John could meet anybody anywhere, and just, he was best friends wherever he went with everybody. So then we went around in Mark Leonard's grave, the oldest, and found it. GPS'd everything for everybody, and I just wanted to hang on and get much as I could documented, because if you went into John's office, I think you could take the Harvard graduate class and never get through it in 5 years. How do we summarize it? He knows where everything's at. He knew where everything was. One of his pet peeves were the computer, though, keeping up with technology, and when it was shut down and you guys are out on an island by yourself trying to get that up started. Another trip we took, we went down to Nashville on the way to Mulberry Grove, and I had snapped a back tooth in half the night before. We went out to dinner at a nice restaurant, and John was there, and I just didn't want to stop the trip, but I got salt in it. It's like, why is your eye watering? And you know, Koonce, nothing's wrong. And so we went on the trip, and down the way, it was driving me nuts. And he called his friend a doctor friend down in Nashville, and said, we'll just take some ibuprofen until you get here, and we'll get you a prescription. Well, I read the bottle wrong. Koonces don't read well, and I took too many ibuprofen, and I started to get the shakes. And so he went and he called him again. He said, no, you're supposed to do like 3 a day, not 3 an hour. And so Nancy got us a suite, where we had our thing like that, and I was just shaking. I couldn't get to sleep, so I left John by himself. But he called on the phone. This is how he knew everybody. And the doctor wrote a prescription to Walmart. We drove in and picked it up. So on the way down, we would find, he had a friend, a cousin, Admiral Frank Kelso, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which his grandma was a Koonce, I think, and John and Nancy hung out with him. But they found their cemetery and paid to get all the woods cleared out, to clear everything out, and found all, and it's perpetuated now, it's cleaned up. So he's gone all over North Carolina, Illinois, Nashville, and cleaned all this stuff to bring it back. It was really important for him, not just his family as it was today and all of his hobbies, but that was a big thing for him. And we were going to the Nashville Library, and if anybody's seen their state library, it's up on a hill next to the Capitol, and we couldn't find a parking spot. Went around and around and around. Down at the bottom of the hill, which has got to be 1,000 stairs. I mean, it's got to be 300 feet. We parked down there, and he had just, I don't know, John's had 12 lives. I mean, it was like 2 years before where he was in the woods cutting on a neighbor's farm trees, and somehow the tree fell on his thighs and smashed both of his femurs. If you look at the x-rays, this is a good place to talk about miracles, because I see black and white, it's hard to understand these things, but when you see facts, it's hard to deny. But John had both his femurs smashed, and they were talking about amputation. And somehow they popped back and were fine, and 2 years later, I'm walking up those stairs, and I'm not in shape or anything, but I go, hey, John, race you to the top, knowing that he had 2 years ago smushed his legs, and I beat him at this because he's really competitive. And so I got about I'm up ahead of him, and he's back there with those legs working like this, and I get about halfway up and sit on a bench, and there goes John. And he goes up there. So I run again like this, and I catch up to him again, I sit on the next bench, and there goes John. And he made it to the top, and he goes, beat ya. That's John. Let's see. And his humor. So we came back home. John was kind of like Grandpa or your dad, Robert A. Bob. But he was humorous, where he would ask you a question you knew the answer to, and then let you try to answer it with the limited information you had, and then not really say anything, bring it up a couple days later and get you. So he's tactical humor. He was just really, really intelligent. And it was just fun hanging out with them. Okay, then, so the last thing I have is, and Nancy gave me permission to say something that hits me hard, that John was cutting wood, doing all the chores, all the hobby stuff that you could imagine, and he had a bad back, hard to sleep, tormented. He did some pills for it, but he just wasn't, it slurred his words, and he didn't want to take any pills for it anymore. And so he stopped, and he just dealt with the pain. So much that he went in to get a cortisone shot on his back, and I don't know that much about it, but you're supposed to have an x-ray and see where the needle goes. Well, they hit him in the spinal cord. He went into cardiac arrest. And he showed me the pictures when they paddled him back without a shirt on, that it burned through with his tissue and everything. And they brought him back to life, but from then, I don't know how much longer he lived after that, but he couldn't do anything after that. And it basically, it was a year and a half, a couple of years, and he just kept losing. Well, they had to pump out gallons of water out of him every 2 weeks, and he just fought and fought and fought and fought and fought and tried to stay alive, and he couldn't recover from what they had done to him. And John had called, and I'll get to the faith part, and I don't want to leave it a negative. So John had called a bunch of attorneys to see what they could do, because he wasn't going to make it. He knew he wasn't. Because of that shot was put in the wrong place. I assisted him with some of our attorneys in La Crosse that have congressmen and senators on staff, and they got the best attorneys you could possibly find. And they found that it fell within the normal parameters of a cortisone shot, that was the risk involved. And I'm just going, in my business as a commercial roofing contractor, if your roof leaks, I can't say put a plant underneath it, I'm liable. But all through that, talking to John, a couple times a week, and he started running out of energy, he always said, it's in God's hands. This is God's will. I have no idea why all this happens to me or why I'm here, but it's all preordained. It's God's will. You need to trust that. So when you're talking about faith, and the last thing I wonder with his ministry, who's going to pick that sword up for John and fight those battles for him that he fought? Big shoes to fill. Amazing uncle.
This is a song that Nancy asked that I play. It was one of John's favorites. It's called Lord, I Know You'll Be There Now. Well, I was looking for a place to rest my weary soul, and I've been looking every day, 'cause the world's been bearing down heavy on me now. Someone please show me the way, and I've been waiting for your love to fall on me from above, but it's only me who's fallen now. So I went to my heart to rest my weary soul, 'cause Lord, I know you'll be there now. You were always right here, right before my eyes, in people's hearts for me to see. So I will go to my own to rest my weary soul, 'cause Lord, I know you'll be there now. in people's hearts for me to see. So I will go to my home to rest my weary soul, 'cause Lord, I know you'll be there now. And I will go to my home to rest my weary soul, 'cause Lord, I know you'll be there now. Love you, John. Love you, Nancy. Love you all. Me too.
My name is Gary, and I'm an alcoholic. I had the great honor and privilege the last 10 or so years to be John's sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And as so often the case, when you have a couple of guys with a fair amount of sobriety, you end up kind of sponsoring each other. That's how it seemed to work. John brought so much wisdom to me in our conversations about the program and about life. As you all know about his generosity, the crosses. Morris will talk more about that. But he was a curious man, and I loved that about him. He just wanted to know about things. He just wanted to understand how the world worked and how relationships worked. He was smart, and he was funny. In fact, he was kind of a smart aleck. I'm sure many of you are on the receiving end of a few of his sly comments. Whenever the phone rang and it was John, I knew I was in for a treat, because he would start with some kind of pretend whininess about something, and before we know, we're both laughing our heads off about the silliness of life and what our higher power throws at us, and then gives us the strength to deal with. He was a great storyteller. Every time he'd go on one of his trips, he would tell me 12 things that happened, but he could do it in a way that wouldn't be boring. He could just make the most fun out of the most simple things. He was, when he was healthy, one of the most physically active guys I knew. I mean, the enormous number of things he did around his place. I'd call him, I said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I just cut up and split a couple of loads of wood, you know." It's like, "Okay, John, do you remember that tree incident?" Yeah, that's in the past, right? Dan talked about the tree incident falling on him. He was mentally active as well, and that was such a joy. I mean, we could talk about anything in our conversations. You know, early on in a sponsee relationship, it's about not drinking and let's talk about the steps. As time goes on, that changes. You still talk about the program, you still talk about how you're using it in your life, and we always did. But we could talk about anything. We talked politics, we talked sports. It was truly a joy because he was so curious about how everything worked. The first AA meeting I met John, when he introduced himself, I mean, for those of you who've been in meetings, you know, but for those who haven't, there's always an introduction. We go around the room, we say, "Hi, I'm Gary, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Sally, I'm an alcoholic." John said, "I'm John Koonce, and I'm an alcoholic." Now, it's not uncommon, but it's a little rarer than normal. And I thought, okay, so he uses he's saying his last name, which of course is fine. In AA, anonymity doesn't mean you don't share that. But I thought about that. So why does John say that? And as I got to know him, I realized there was a humility and in accepting totally and completely his alcoholism. But the pride that he had, that he was part of the herd, and he was there for the gift. And he wanted to totally and completely embrace that. And he did. John took the program seriously. He lived it. He lived these steps. He continued to work on his defects all the time, ask God to remove them. He prayed. He meditated. He did what was necessary to become a better man every day, the gift of Alcoholics Anonymous to all of us who are in the program. But he didn't take himself too seriously. Rule 62 of AA says, don't take yourself so damn seriously. And John completely and totally understood that and lived by it. One of my good AA friends said that the best compliment you can give someone is that they give good example. Boy, did John give good example. He gave us the good example on how to live, and I was with him 3 hours before he passed. And during that time and the previous months, he gave a good example on how to die, with grace, with humility, with faith. Thank you, John.
My name is Morris Ray, and I too am an alcoholic. The journey that brought me to John Koonce and Nancy, it's one that was rather unusual because I met Ernie Larson and John McAndrews before I ever met John Koonce. I met Ernie Larson and John McAndrews in February of 2005 at River Bend Prison, where I was incarcerated. And Ernie Larson and I just became real good friends and just wrote letters backwards and forth. And he told John, he said, if you want to work with a man that's doing 12-step work in prison, write this man a letter. Well, John wrote me a letter, and I wrote him back. And he wrote me another letter, and he said, I never expected you to write me back. He said, I only wrote you because I was told to. I told John, I said, John, I write everybody back that writes me. And our friendship grew behind that, and we've been writing each other for about 2 or 3 months, and I said, I better send this man a picture so he know who he's writing. And so I sent him a picture of me, and in his return letter, he sent me a picture of him. He said, well, you want me to know what you look like, you need to know what I look like. So he sent me this picture, and as we wrote these letters backwards and forth, in 2000 and early in 2009, John wrote me a letter and asked me could he come to River Bend Prison and tell his story. I thought, wow. So I wrote him back and told him, I said, look, I'll get this set up for you, because at the time I was the president of an organization called Project New Beginnings at River Bend, and I was also over the AA community. And I said, I'll get this set up so you can come in and you can participate in 2 programs, so you won't just come in the afternoon, stay a couple hours, and have to leave coming that far. So I got it set up so John and Nancy could come in and do the AA program and come back that evening to the Project New Beginners graduation exercise. Well, while John was there, well, let me tell you this. John brought Nancy 1,000 miles into a prison. Never been into a prison before on the month of their 45th wedding anniversary. Who brings their wife to a prison on their anniversary? John Koonce. I thought, wow, this guy's serious. And anyway, as we talked while they were there, I had developed this program called Crosses for Children in December 2007. And John and I were sitting and talking, and he'll tell this story a whole lot differently. But I kept telling him over and over and over, this is the way it was. And he told me, he said, I think I can cut these crosses in my shop. I said, you think so? He said, yeah. So I gave him one. Nothing like the cross that I wear now, because John modified them and made them look better. And he started cutting these crosses. Well, he and I worked out a deal. He said, I'll just send these to you. I said, John, I can't get these crosses in unless I send you some money off my trust fund account to show that I paid for them. John said, well, just send me $5. $5. He said, send me $5 and I'll send you 100 crosses. So when I got ready to send John this money, I sent him $10 because I thought $5, that's awful cheap. I won't even pay the postage. And so he sent me 100 crosses with a letter. He said, I owe you 100 crosses. And I wrote him back, I said, no, you don't. He said, well, that was our agreement. And then he said, the next time you order crosses, don't say how many you want. And so we created a name for John's hobby shop, and we called it N&J Hobbies. We made an order for him. He said, why did you put Nancy's name first? I said, women before me and John. So we called it N&J Hobbies, and I would send him one of those forms and ask for a box of wooden crosses and send him $10, and John would send me a box of 750 crosses. Every time he sent a box, the $10 didn't even pay the postage. I wrote him a letter. I said, John, at least let me pay the postage. He said, no, we made a deal. And he stuck to that. And when I got out of prison, he called me on the phone. He said, guess what? I said, what, John? He said, you don't have to send me no more money. Just pick up the phone and call, and I'll send you a box of crosses. And so he continued this. Before I left Riverbend Prison in 2013, John had sent me over 20,000 crosses. We had distributed over 15,000 necklaces in 25 countries around the world. Today, those necklaces reach 26 countries around the world because I continue doing the program through John. John was such an amazing person, such a giving person. I mean, enough words can't be said about the goodness of this man. Behind everything I've heard here this morning, he was just an awesome, awesome, awesome individual. You don't see that kind of love and that kind of giving spirit in everybody that's walking this earth. John was the example that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about. It tells us to be an example of what recovery looks like. Well, John was every bit of that. The man showed more love to me and what I was trying to do than anybody that I know in this world. And he stayed steadfast to that. He would come to Nashville and we'd get together, and this one time we went to find one of his family cemeteries, and me and John had been on a few adventures, and we were down in Lincoln County, walking around in this grave. We went down a road called Koonce Road, and we found this cemetery. And he was walking around in that cemetery looking for gravestones of his family members, which I thought was awesome, that he would track his genealogy that well. And he said, well, I'll do yours. So he did a little research on mine and found out some stuff about my father that I didn't know. He was just, like it's been said, John was curious. He wanted to know stuff. And wanting to know stuff, he would do the research, and which was so awesome. But I was here 9 years ago in July. John and Nancy invited me up. I stayed at their house. Such wonderful, wonderful people who made me feel at home, made me feel like family the whole time I was here. And I came to this church, and the first time I'd ever told my story in front of a room full of people. And at the time, it wasn't but 6 people in the whole room that I knew, and everybody else was strangers. But John made me comfortable in being here. He carried me all around Minnesota and Wisconsin and saw a lot of things, went to a lot of different places. Ernie Larson passed before I got here, before I got out of prison. And I met his wife, Paula, which was a blessing, because Ernie and I had written so many letters to each other. And when I talked at the Union Gospel Mission, she came up to me and introduced herself, and she said, everything you said in your talk is in your letters. She said, I felt like I already knew you. John made me that comfortable to come and talk in front of strangers and to give you my life's journey, just to show you how the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works. You know, John was a living example. He was a true living example. You can't find those kind of people, and I don't mean no disrespect to the church, but you can't find his kind of people in a church. It's just not there. It's just not there. You know, I kind of wish it was. I wish it was in the lives of everybody, and anybody that knows John Koonce. If you want to have an example on how to live your life, remember how he lived his, because he was such an amazing man. I love you, Nancy. I loved John, and I'll always be around for you if you need me. I'm just a plane ride away. I will get on a plane and come up here. Thank y'all for allowing me to be here.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Nancy asked me to close with these words. John's most important legacy was his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Grandpa was so proud and loved each one of you beyond measure. You were a big part of Grandpa's happiness. Grandpa always said, I got more and was blessed more than I ever thought. You were the blessing. So as we go, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Now I invite you all to do a little sing-along here with Eric as you depart the sanctuary and head that way for a meal.
Light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everybody, this is the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. One more time. This is the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.